We're going to get started here. My name is Grace Bay. I am CEO of Patton Logistics and super excited to host the webinar today with Jesse Smith, our Director of Operations. We are going to, as always, go through a little bit of teaching and talking today about DRO and preparing for peak. The beginning of October is always when we start really getting in peak mode and peak mindset. So Jesse's going to spend some time talking to you guys about that today. And as always, just a reminder to load in your questions because we're going to move to Q&A after the portion on DRO and peak planning. And this is open to any and all questions that you guys want to talk about. Anything's open for discussion on the table. So feel free to be loading those in as we're talking so that we've got some good questions to go through once we're done talking about DRO and peak. And before we do any of that, I want to give you guys just a brief update on some inventory that we've added onto the website. So we've got 4 opportunities to talk about today. First is a P&D out of Northern Georgia. This is 7 P&D routes. It's listed at $70,000. So that's probably as low as you will see any opportunity listed for. That's 9.84% of revenue. It's got 4.4 EBITDA, 1 manager. As I mentioned, it's an extremely low entry point into the FedEx ground network. It's a high mileage operation. So, you know, there are some pros and cons that we can talk through about that, but still pros about the operation for sure. It's got 2 spare drivers available for contingency, if that's something that you're interested in. There are no trucks included in this deal, so just the territory. And then we've got a line haul operation out of North Central Colorado, 2 line haul runs for $500,000. It's 47% of revenue. Sees about 9% EBITDA. It's 2 unassigned runs. So just so you know, those 2 are unassigned. They are seeing consistent runs with high growth potential in this particular terminal though. So that's an opportunity to turn these unassigned into assigned runs. They have 2 additional trucks available for adding extra power if you want to add some extra drivers since it is a higher growth potential market. And they have leased vehicles, which is great because you can turn the repair and maintenance expense into a fixed cost. 2 additional P&Ds that I want to go through. These are both carve-outs. So we've got one in Western Florida, 7 P&D routes. It's listed at $276,000. It's 32.63% of revenue. It sees about 8.6% EBITDA. It does come with a manager, 2 spare trucks, 3 spare drivers, and a desirable beachfront location. So that's always a plus. And these are low mileage routes, which, as we said, there are pros and cons to high and low mileage. But right now in a environment where fuel cost is more expensive than we've seen, low mileage routes can be really attractive for that. And then last but not least, we have 10 P&D routes. Also in Western Florida, listed at $208,000. That's 22.26% of revenue. This one sees about a 6% EBITDA, 1 manager, 1 spare truck, 2 spare drivers, and this is also a beachfront location. So if any of these sound interesting to you and something that you want to hear more about, make sure to reach out to our team so we can get you more info on these deals. And now, with all of that out of the way, we're going to transition and bring Jesse on to talk to you guys a little bit about DRO peak planning, and then we will transition to some Q&A. So Jesse, you want to take it away?
Hello. Yes. We're going to do question of the day.
Oh, that's right. I almost forgot. Okay. So as Spencer says, we require you all to answer a question before you can ask a question. You just can't come in and ask any question that you want without answering one first. So we like to keep it fun and do new questions every week. And this week, I think we picked, Jesse, remind me, if you had an autobiography, what would it be called? Is that right?
That's it.
Okay. So you go first and then I'll give you mine. I've got 2 in my mind. So I'm going to see what direction you go with first, and then that will determine which one I'm going to pick.
Well, okay. I'm going to be real cheesy. So just be ready. Okay. This is actually an idea I had for a podcast. So if I see anybody coming out with a podcast by this name, I'm going to be real upset and I'm going to know where you got it. So mine, since I've just been doing FedEx my entire professional career, basically, I'm going to call mine the package deal. Right. So
okay. All right.
It's going to be all about this logistics industry because that's most of my adult life. So
I love it. That is awesome. I think you could still do that podcast.
I may still, but like I said, if someone beats me to it.
I was about to say, you guys might see one of these weekly webinars turn into the package deal led by Jesse Smith.
Love it.
That's awesome. Okay. I am going to go with, and this is also kind of cheesy. I feel like you'll get this, Jesse, because you're a redhead too. Yep. But I feel like in like everything that I've done in life, people just expect you as a redhead to be this like fiery person. Mm-hmm. I can't affirm or deny that that's actually my personality. But I think it would be called Reign of Fire. That's what mine would be. Like making it happen, you know, and also expectations that people have of you as a redhead. So
now Reign, R-E-I-G-N or R-A-I-N to really change it up? I
don't know. I think it could go either way.
Okay. Okay. All right.
That's the way I'd go. All right. Okay. So let's transition now, since we have the package deal here, to talk to us about DRO and peak planning. I'll kick it off to you and take it away.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to have something here for prospective and existing contractors. So if you have been in the space a while, bear with me because I'm going to give a little bit of background to what we call DRO, or dynamic route optimization. So kind of going to go back to the start of when they came out with it and briefly walk us through where we're at now. And then we'll talk a little bit about how it exists, what it does, and how we can use it to prepare for upcoming peak season. So back in 2018, the FedEx Ground network did what was called overlap. So they integrated their FedEx Ground and FedEx Home Delivery networks into a single network. And what that did was a couple things. Number one, as you know, you're operating a single territory. So a designated CSA or contracted service area, usually has one or more zip codes in it. So you are contracted to deliver every package in the FedEx Ground network that's delivered to that area. Well, what happened was you had, all the homes and businesses getting delivered in that same geographic area by two different contractors. So when everybody overlapped, the same contractor got control of both of those territories, essentially different territories, but it was the same geography, right? So what FedEx rolled out along with that was something called DRO, which essentially lets you run dynamic routes instead of static routes. So let me get into that for just a second, because it's going to make sense for later. So static work areas or static routes are really made for volume that is consistent day in and day out, right? So a static route runs the same streets, the same businesses, the same homes, Monday through Friday or Tuesday through Saturday, which was the old home delivery network, right? So when you introduce 6 and 7 day service, then you had days that are obviously, they looked much different from other days of the week. So you had very light days, like for us, it's Sunday. And for some of us, Saturday is pretty light. And then you had your Monday through Friday, which is generally heavier because you've got ground and residential volume mixed into one, right? So what that means is that you need to have a different number of routes for the heavy volume days and a different number for the light volume days. So in other words, this is a dynamic route environment that we now live in the FedEx Ground network. So to accommodate that, FedEx switched from what was called automated work area design, where basically there was a set route or a static route, over to DRO, which lets you, the contractor, input what routes you want run, what geography goes on which truck, how many trucks you want in your plan, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a very, very fine level of control over your route planning each and every day, right? So essentially DRO is the program that tells that you input how many routes you want, and it sends it to FedEx's sortation software to tell each package that comes down the belt where to go, what belt to go to, what truck to go on, et cetera, okay? So as I said, you have different volume days. So one day, if in some terminals, let's say you have a light day that's Tuesday, you want to run 8 trucks, okay, for your territory. Now, Thursday, for example, might be heavier, and you may want to run 11 trucks. So you're going to be able to run a custom number of trucks to match the volume that you see. And FedEx is going to tell you the night before how many projected packages and stops you have coming to your contracted service area. So based on that number, you can go in on a nightly basis and you can go in and change your 8 route plan If you need to add a truck, you can make it a 9-route plan. You can take a truck away. You can move different geographic zones called anchor areas. You can move those in between routes if you want. If one truck is too light, but another one's too heavy, you can move stuff around like that. You have a very, very fine level of control over what you can do with the stops that come in, okay? So essentially, it's route plan based and you have control of it versus FedEx Ground having control of it, okay? So some of the pros and some of the cons, and this is gonna vary by contractor, right? So I've made it easy. The pros that I'm going to give you are also the cons. Okay, so let's go over what I mean by that. So the pros. So dynamic work areas, again, that's in contrast to what's called static work areas. This helps ensure route efficiency. So if a static work area plan has 8 trucks in it, then you're dedicated to running 8 trucks no matter what the volume is. If volume is light, and there's a lot of light volume in the network right now, right? We're seeing that on a pretty broad scale. So you may want to cut back your route plans and only run 6 trucks where the rest of the year you have run 8. You can do that with DRO. So dynamic all the way down the line. Second thing is, the second pro is full autonomy. You don't have to rely on FedEx Ground in your nightly route planning process for literally anything except your volume projection, okay? You have full control of everything else. The next thing is sequencing. What I mean by this is basically you can customize the way the routing of each route lays out. So if you wanted to start on Oak Street and end on Elm Street every day, you can do that for each of your routes. You don't have to do it, but you can if you want. It gives you full control over the direction that the trucks go, okay? And then finally, it gives you granular control. So in addition to designating like packages for a specific geographic zone, like we said, called an anchor area, you can also designate it down to the stop level. So if you have one specific stop you want to pull out of an anchor area and put from one route to another route, you can do that, right? So again, those are all things that I consider pros. A lot of people are going to see some cons in those. So we're going to go back through that. So what are the cons of these? So dynamic work areas also means that you will get drivers that they like static work areas. When they come in on their 5-day or 6-day shift or whatever it is they work, they want their route to always be their route. So if you move them one street over, be prepared for a conniption fit, because I've seen that more times than I can count. Drivers like things to stay the same, okay? Obviously, we can't always do that because we're trying to be out there making money. We need maximum efficiency 7 days a week. But that is potential downside on the personnel side of things. Your drivers are not always going to like that. And it's hard to change your culture to adapt to that mindset. And second, the autonomy piece. If you don't know what you're doing in DRO, it is a lot to take on. So whoever is running your DRO, probably your BC, if they don't know what they're doing, it can be a very time-consuming, time-intensive process for them. So I got it down when I was a BC to 5 to 10 minutes per night. If you can set up your route plans really well in advance, you can basically let it run on autopilot. But if you have someone that does not set up their anchor areas very well, this is a very time-consuming process each and every night. So make sure your BC is well prepared to run your DRO. The sequencing, again, same principle as the static work areas. Drivers not only like their route, they like their route to run the same way every day. So if they start on Oak Street 5 days a week and they work that 6th day on a weekend to fill in, and they're starting on a completely different side of town, they're not going to like that. Again, some of them like the change of scenery, but a lot of them, they need their routine. So just be aware of that. And then finally, the granular control. So there are so many different levers that you can pull in DRO that if you pull one and forget to unpull it, it will stay active on that route plan every time you use that route plan. So just be aware that if you've made a change, you need to go back and undo it, or if you decide to keep it, make sure that you've prepared the rest of your plan to accommodate that permanently going forward, okay? So that's kind of just a brief overview of what it is. As it relates to peak planning, so there's 3 things I want to talk about real quick. First, you want to build out your additional route plans that are going to accommodate peak volume. Start doing this now. I always tell people September and October, you need to pull your BC aside, go through your DRO setup and be like, is this going to accommodate, an increase of 30% volume or whatever it is you plan to see for peak season, right? Make sure that you have plans built in so that your BC, when Black Friday hits, they are not scrambling and having to spend 5 hours completely redoing your DRO setup. That is a nightmare. You want to make sure you do it ahead of time. You can make changes to your DRO throughout the day. It does not have to be at a certain time of night. Okay, you can go in and set it up the way you want right now and get it out of the way. Along with that, a little side note, your anchor areas, your little geographic zones, make sure those are cut down from a size like this down to this, because particularly your residential areas, if there's 50 stops in an area like that now, there's going to be 100 stops in there when peak comes. Okay, so a little tiny zone that has 50 stops is going to have twice as many. Okay, so make sure you cut some of those bigger anchors with a lot of stops, cut those down, cut them in half, cut them in thirds, whatever you got to do, cut those down so that when you're moving these regions from one truck to another to balance out your volume, you can use little bite-sized chunks instead of like 100 stops at a time, right? And then finally, again, I can't emphasize this enough, make sure your BC knows what he or she is doing. Because if they're already spending an hour on it now outside of peak, it's at least going to double during peak, just to make sure you got so many more work areas to deal with, different drivers, different route considerations. Make sure they know what they're doing ahead of time so that you're ready going into this very busy season. So, Grace, that's all I've got on this part of it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, just a reminder to everybody that our question of the day is, in case you missed it, if you had an autobiography, what would it be called? And load that in with your question. And then after you load your question in, Jesse and I are going to go through these and answer as many as we got. So Jesse, I guess I'll start going through some of these and we can kind of answer back and forth on some of these. So, okay. Tim Crawley, who did not give a name for his autobiography. So Tim, if you want to throw it in there, I'll give you a pass on this one. So Tim wants to know, what is the process to purchasing these routes? Do you work with financing companies for 100% financing? It's a great question. So yes, we've got lots of lending partners that we work with that we can help connect you to that do the financing for these routes. A lot of the routes are actually SBA eligible. So you can potentially get this funded through the SBA. We can make introductions for other funding sources. Some sellers are interested, especially right now, in doing seller financing. So that's something where you can potentially structure a piece to be seller financed and then a piece to have some traditional financing to it. But if you're interested in that, be sure to reach out to our team and we can kind of talk through those options with you. And some are deal specific too, so some particular deals might not be SBA eligible. Some may be some, at a higher purchase price, you might want to have different strategies there on how you fund it. But our team is very versed in being creative in that deal structure and financing. So reach out to our team and we can help you with that. All right. Okay.
Now, see, he did actually answer a little bit farther down. The long wait is
the
his
long
autobiography.
wait. Okay, that's interesting. I know you were just waiting for FedEx to ground Tim. That's what you were waiting for.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go to Jeff, and Jeff is asking about Purple Friday. So this is interesting, and I think that his specific question is what's going on with Purple Friday. And I think that the same thing is going on with Purple Friday as what was going on kind of Expo time, where everybody has a business to run and business decisions to make regarding how you run that business. And, Purple Friday is what you make of it. So I think that's kind of where we stand on that one, but good question, Jeff, to get an update there. Okay, let's see. We've got GIF. And his biography would be called Interestingly Quiet. I wonder if that would be a really short biography or a really long biography.
You see that going either way.
I could see it going either way. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say interestingly long for interestingly quiet. Okay, so Gift's question is, do you see FedEx line haul decreasing and cutting runs next year when renewals come up? Any thoughts on percentage decrease? So this is an interesting question, and I might take this one too, Jesse, and I'll do the next one. But line haul has dedicated runs and they have unassigned runs in the network. That's kind of how they split it up. And dedicated runs are established when FedEx sees that there is a pattern of volume going specifically from a certain point A to a certain point B, and there are a certain amount of trailers that will require at least 1, 2, 3, 4 potentially runs each day to get that volume from point A to point B. So let's say that there is a Hagerstown, Maryland to Nashville demand, and they're just getting trailer after trailer for that pathway. They might post a dedicated run for that volume because it's so consistent and the need is there every week consistently, and it's more than what they can currently commit to. And so dedicated runs typically are the last to decrease, and they're the last to get cut. Unassigned is what gets cut first. Unassigned is basically a position on a board that you have where FedEx says, as we have volume that comes into the network that needs to go potentially anywhere, not necessarily to the same place each week or each day, we are going to call you when it's your turn and give you the opportunity to run that trailer or those trailers to whatever destination they need to go to. And that is more of where we see decreases happen or changes happen than in the dedicated network. The lanes have to be pretty established to become dedicated in the first place. And then within the dedicated lanes, you have positions. So you have, let's say there's 7 runs that do that Maryland to Tennessee run that we talked about. There's a position 1, 2, 3, all the way through 7. And position 7 would be the first one to get cut if volume is too light to make the run. Then it would go to 6, 5, so on and so forth. So I think something that's important to mention as we're talking about decreases and what would decrease and how is understanding that position too. So if you're looking at a line haul business and you're trying to decide how protected am I from potential drops in volume, you need to be asking the question, what position is this dedicated run? And also not only what position is it, but how many of them are there? And so if you're 1, that's great. But if you're 1 of 1, it's not as great as it sounds, right? So 1 of 25 would be awesome, but like that run's not going anywhere. If you're 1 of 1, that's a little bit more, risky to say, well, if the volume's not there, I'm the only one to cut. So I don't necessarily have a prediction for you or a crystal ball that I can look in to say, here's what I expect to happen and whether it stays the same, increases, decreases. I think that what is more important to understand is your risk reward on either side of that happening, right? And so if you can look at a business and you can look at a set of runs and understand their positioning and feel really confident that whether there's an increase or a decrease, you're isolated from any negativity on either side of that, or you're comfortable with that position, then I think that's what's important to understand there. Okay. All right. So let's go to, let's see, we've had some good ones come in here. All right, so Diana, her title would be Failure Wasn't an Option. Love that. You mix Rain of Fire with Failure Wasn't an Option. I feel like you have a dynamic female tag team duo right there. I might be calling you Diana for a book deal. Okay, so her question is, what is your advice for a new contractor when it comes to building a new team and finding an experienced, I think she meant BC here. So if you meant something else, Diana, put it in there, but I think you meant BC. So Jesse, you want to take that one?
Yeah, new contractor, man, that's a big ask right there. So if you're looking to, I guess there's a couple ways to go with this. Are you trying to promote from within, or are you finding someone from outside the organization? So I guess I'll start with the first one. I would definitely recommend promoting from within if there are solid candidates, but don't just compromise just because you want to have someone from your team, right? If there's no good candidates, then I would potentially look elsewhere. Before I was BC, I was headhunted from another contractor in a different building. So I would not recommend going from anyone in particular, I would put an ad out and doing it that way if you're going to do it. I would not try to recruit directly from someone else in your terminal or another terminal. I would just go the Indeed route and do it the clean way. There's some things you're going to want to look for. One thing we always say at Patton is the things that make a good driver don't necessarily make a good BC or manager. It's a completely different skill set. So the number one thing far and away that I would say you need to look for is, are they a self-driven, self-motivated person who can take ownership in your company? They need to, particularly if you're an absentee owner, they need to run the business like you would if you were there, bottom line. So if you can't find someone with that level of buy-in, you need to continue your search until you do, because that's a pretty non-negotiable part of it, I would say.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And if you don't have the right fit for your BC and your operation, you're going to struggle. And it's something that you will learn very quickly if you have the right person or not. It makes itself pretty apparent pretty early on. And so one piece of advice I give to new owners coming in who might have a problematic BC or maybe not the right fit of a BC is, if they're egregiously mismanaging the business, you have to make a change, right?
Yeah.
But if it is just not the right fit, it's not quite right, they're not quite, doing what you want from them, I encourage you to keep that person on for at least 30 days so that you can get your bearings and you can learn a little bit, because as Jesse can attest to this, like the FedEx, even just like the language that people use inside of the terminal, like it is like learning a new language and learning a new culture. And so even after 30 days, you're going to have conversations that you're like, I don't even know what they're talking about. And so it's good to have some stability in a BC who is familiar with the drivers and the routes and the operations, while you just kind of absorb for 30 days and keep an eye on, what's happening, and maybe start your search. But if it is just not quite the right fit, definitely don't make the cut like right at the beginning, because you're going to be drowning with so much that you've got to learn and know before you can really be competent in running the operation without that support.
Yep.
One thing I want to say about sourcing externally. So this is a question that I get asked all the time. It's, how do you find a good BC? What do you look for? How do you source them? And one thing that we have really honed in on when we've looked outside of our operations and we've hired someone outside of the FedEx space is making sure that they have experience managing employees who will be similar demographic to drivers, because it is a very, very specific type of manager-employee relationship. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of this job is the employee management side of it for the BCs. And so if they have familiarity with managing, like warehouse employees or manufacturing, or obviously any other delivery like Amazon, any UPS, stuff like that, that will translate really well. We've also had a lot of good experience with people who have a background in law enforcement and military. That lends itself to a personality, it seems like, to fit really well in this space. So those are just some things that you can look for as you're searching on Indeed and stuff like that. But it is quite the undertaking to come into the BC role without having any FedEx experience at all. And it's something that you also just need to be aware of your drivers potentially having some issues being led by someone who hasn't done their job, right? So it might be a good idea for you to bring that person in to drive for even a few weeks before they step into that management role, so they really understand what the drivers go through. They can manage them better and have a little bit more respect and buy-in from the team.
Hey, Grace, just real briefly, just for those who aren't familiar, I see Collie Johnson just chimed in. BC just stands for business contact. That's just an operations manager. That's just the FedEx lingo for operations manager.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, it's a whole new language. So
it is. Perfectly illustrated. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's go to Marwin. I'm going to send this one to you, Jesse. So Marwin's autobiography would be called Life After. Very mysterious. Okay. We're getting lots of mysterious titles here.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay.
Yeah.
Life after what? We're going to have to know, Marwin. Okay. So his question is, Jesse, how did you learn the DRO system?
Well, when DRO rolled out in 2018, I was a VC for a contractor, and I rolled with the punches as it came out. So I've learned it from the ground up. I was instructed directly by the DRO ambassadors that FedEx Ground had and sent out to the various terminals. So I got it straight from the source, I guess you could say, and I've kind of grown along with it and just kind of stayed in the system the entire time that I've been a BC and since. And it's a program that I love, which is kind of weird. A lot of people are going to be like, you're a freak for saying that, but I love maps. I love dealing with stuff like that. So it's just sort of, it kind of fit with my natural interests anyway. So I just, like I said, I've been with it since it started and have enjoyed it ever since.
Yeah, that is something I have not heard many people say, Jesse, but Jesse is great at it. And Jesse also helps contractors set up their DRO and kind of perfect their DRO. So if you're interested in purchasing a business, or if you're a new contractor or it's something you're struggling with, definitely reach out to us. And it's something that Jesse, as he mentioned, loves to work on. So he'd be happy to work with you to try to get anchor areas set up correctly, and override set up correctly, make sure that you've got an efficient operation there, especially right before peak. It's great to do those cleanups, because if you go into peak with an already inefficient route plan and then you build on top of that, it's building inefficiencies in the time of the year that you want to make sure you're as efficient as you possibly can be so that you can make the most out of that peak revenue, especially if you signed your Schedule K. So lots of things that if you're not an existing contractor, don't worry about. You can just forget I said that, and then we can talk about it when you become a contractor.
Yes.
All right. So let's go to, oh, Diana, good question. How do you contact Jesse? So Jesse's going to put his contact info in the chat here, and he'll send you his email address. So if it's something that you want to get in touch with him about, you can just shoot him an email. Good question, Diana. Okay. So let's go to a question about processing drivers. So we have someone asking, while processing a new driver through First Advantage, once compliant but waiting on drug test results, can the applicant be used as a jumper? This is an awesome question, especially on the heels of peak, because you're going to have to be super creative in how you manage your payroll as you're bringing people on board. And the answer is yes. You can process someone and use them as a jumper as soon as the background check is done. And technically the drug test doesn't even have to be done. It's just background check that you need in order for someone to get onto a truck and actually be approved to be a jumper. They have to be 18 years or older. So if it's someone you're not planning to use as a driver in the end, you can use 18 up to be a jumper. Drivers have to be 21 or up. But once that background comes back eligible, then they can get onto a truck. And I like to do this in order to reduce my training time. So when you have drivers, when you go into peak season, and this has been especially true during COVID, the background or the drug testing processing time, and sometimes the employment verification, just all the different things that have to happen in First Advantage, gets really bogged down and it slows down, and we see really long processing times for candidates. And just for those of you who don't know, First Advantage is just the third-party approval program that FedEx uses for you to process your drivers through in order for them to become compliant drivers and be eligible to drive a FedEx truck. So First Advantage gets really slow during peak season, and this is a way to get your candidates in the door, making money, training sooner, so that once they are officially 100% approved and cleared to drive, you've reduced that training time that you're going to need to spend with them, because they've already seen how to work the scanners, how to make deliveries, how to do pre-trip inspections and post-trip inspections on their trucks. So when you actually have them in a position where they can start to drive, all you're training them on is actually operating the vehicle, making sure they're driving safely. And so you spend way less time on the back end. So it's not that it's more training time overall all the time. It's just you get to kind of get them started making money faster. And that's really important in a competitive labor market, because you have other employers like Amazon and even like Starbucks and Target now that pay similar to what contractors pay, and they can get people in the door making money same week that they apply, versus on our side, sometimes it's 2 to 3 weeks before a driver is even approved and can come in to start training. So just a good quick trick to be able to get that going faster. All right, let's see here. Let's go to reading some of these really quick. Okay, we have an anonymous attendee who's asking, does the DRO system give the drivers directions? You want to take that?
Good question. Yeah, we get that one a lot. No, it does not. You need a third-party vendor, or you just need the driver to have route knowledge in order to get navigation and turn-by-turn directions when they actually dispatch out on their route. So there's really no infrastructure in place to get what's in DRO in front of the drivers. It's just for setting up the routes at night.
Yep. And there are lots of really good route optimization softwares available in this space. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about GroundCloud and Beans and some other optimization software, Package Route. So there are a lot of players in the space. GroundCloud has about 70% market penetration. So most contractors use GroundCloud, and it integrates really, really well with a lot of other requirements that you have to do related to safety training and pre and post trip inspections and fleet maintenance and stuff like that. So it's nice to kind of all be on an integrated platform there. And GroundCloud has done a really good job of integrating that. There are pros to all the others as well, but that's what we use in our operations.
And by the way, if someone does call in with a DRO question that it interfaces with GroundCloud or routing in some way, I obviously, since Grace said we used GroundCloud, I can offer quite a bit of help on that as well if anyone needs that kind of bundled in with the DRO stuff.
Awesome. All right, let's go to let's go to John Webb, whose autobiography would be, really, that's what happened.
I love that one.
That one is great. And John's question is, what are some of your tips or tricks for the creative scheduling you mentioned? So do you want to talk about scheduling, Jesse, and kind of leading up to peak on how we manage that?
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say if a driver applies and they say I can only work 2 days a week, my rule is never say no based on their schedule. There's other reasons to say no, but that is not one of them. So my part-time drivers are one of my biggest assets in my tool belt. I use any and all schedules, and I'll plug them in because I'd say 9 times out of 10, if you got too many people on the schedule, most of the time people will be willing to take an unpaid day off unless it is like a very regular thing. A lot of your regular drivers, especially, this is a terrific time to give them some extra time off. Now, again, not paid, but a lot of them will take it because they know what's about to come, right? They know the peak season, 6 days a week. Some of them are going to work 7 days a week. It's a very crazy, chaotic time, and they're going to want some time for some R&R before that hits. So when it comes to scheduling, if you got someone who can just work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, put them on and give some of your 5-day-a-week drivers some time off in that period. Make it work. There's almost always a situation where you can make that work.
Totally agree. And I think if you pair that with cutting down training time, getting people in quickly so that you're not, having to lose candidates, all of those things paired together make for a really great plan for peak. And one of the things that I think is important too for peak is setting expectations ahead of time for your new hires on what to expect, because if you are growing your team and you don't necessarily want to add a ton of payroll on the very front end of peak preparation, you can set expectations for your new hires to say, hey, during October, I'm going to need you 4 days a week. And then during November, I need you 5. And then December, I need you 6. And so you can kind of tier that schedule as well. Some people are open to it. Some people are not. Some people are going to say, I only want to work 5 days a week ever, period, flat. And then as Jesse mentioned, we're kind of in a position now where we've learned to really roll and work with any type of scheduling that we have to. But it's great if you can kind of tier that so that you don't have to add on a 5-day a week payroll for 5 new people in 1 month when you really don't have the work for them. And so you can kind of be creative in your schedule that way too. Okay, we have another question from an anonymous attendee, very mysterious. How would you work around the overtime rules? So I think this was probably in response to your 6-7 day comment, Jesse, about peak season and working that much during peak season. And one thing that's important to know about this space is that if drivers are operating a vehicle that is over 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, they're actually exempt. You are exempt from having to pay them overtime. And it's a federal motor carrier safety exemption that is across most states. And definitely check with a wage and hour attorney before you roll it out in your state. Some are a little bit more persnickety about how you do it, but for 99% of the cases, it will apply. And what you just have to be really careful about during peak season is a lot of the like transit vans that you rent or cargo vans that you rent to add trucks to your fleet might be under 10,000 pounds. And so that's where you can get into a bit of a sticky situation, because if a driver operates a vehicle that is under 10,000 pounds, even one day within a working week, then you're responsible for paying them overtime for that entire week. So let's say you have a driver that runs in a cargo van that's under 10,000 pounds on Monday, and then they're in a P1200 the rest of the week. Every single day that they worked, you're responsible for paying them overtime, not just the day that they were in the under 10,000 pound vehicle.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see here. We've got, all right, another question from Diana. I'm really liking your questions, Diana. Keep them coming. So she is asking, since I'm new, what is the best way to assess transportation needs, meaning how many vehicles and what type of vehicles to be cost effective and productive at the same time? So I'm thinking that she means this in relation to peak, but potentially in relation to the operation at large. So Jesse, you want to take peak and then I'll take operation at large?
Yeah, so for peak, I always say you want to run the largest type of vehicle you can possibly get that is appropriate for your type of area. So for example, if you have a lot of long country driveways, you do not want to put a big old step van out there, right? So you want to keep the vehicle appropriate to the terrain that it's covering. So in most of your neighborhoods and things like that, a P1200 is not a problem. Sometimes you have like tight cul-de-sacs where it may be like a length of the vehicle may be an issue, but in general, P1000s, P1200s, if you've got tight suburban neighborhoods, you're going to want to go with as many of those as possible. Now for peak, you're not always going to be able to get those. Those are very, very hard to rent, much less buy right now. So you're going to probably have to make do with box trucks and cargo vans, which means your efficiency per route is going to suffer a little bit. That's sort of just the nature of the beast when it comes to peak season in this space, unfortunately. But get the biggest one you can, put it as many stops on it as you can. And again, there's some DRO tips and tricks. If you want to reach out to me, I'll be glad to show you some things that you can do routing wise and getting as many boxes as possible on different types of vehicles. I can help you with that. But yeah, just the bigger, the better, as long as you can do it safely.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that the answer for operation at large, not just peak season, is very much the same. Just making sure that you're not limiting your driver's capacity to do a full day of work by the size vehicle that they're in, while also being mindful of the terrain that you're operating in. But when you're assessing a business, when you're looking to make an acquisition, there's definitely questions that you need to ask about the fleet before you just assume that the right trucks are in the right spot. And our team can help you with that for sure. But making sure that we're asking capacity questions, we're asking maintenance questions, and we're also asking safety tech questions. That's something that's really, really important right now in the FedEx world, because there is a deadline coming in September of 2023 where FedEx is requiring any new trucks that come onto a Schedule B, which is basically just your list of vehicles that are approved to operate in your territory, have to have FCAM and lane departure. So FCAM is basically that automatic braking that happens. If the vehicle is sensing that a collision is about to happen and the brake is not being applied, it will apply the brake for the driver. And then lane departure is just like we have kind of in our personal vehicles, where you can see and get a notification and a warning if you're starting to depart from your lane. And so those two pieces of technology at this point are not something that can be retrofitted onto older vehicles. They're coming built specially onto 2022s because the manufacturers now are seeing that it's a requirement. So with 2022s and newer, you can get that. Older trucks, you cannot, and you can't retrofit it. So that's just something to be mindful of as you're looking at fleets too, because FedEx is going to grandfather these trucks in if they're on a Schedule B prior to September 2023. But after that, any new truck cannot be used if it doesn't have that technology. And a sale does constitute as new trucks being added to a Schedule B. So let's say you're looking to make a purchase in September of 2023, all of those trucks would have to have FCAM and lane departure on them for you to be able to use them. All right, let's go to another question here from John. So John is asking, how do people who utilize the alternative vehicle program compensate those employees per stop daily, or are you required to track hours for them? It's a great question. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with the alternative vehicle program, or AVP as FedEx calls it, they love their acronyms. AVP is just a program where FedEx is allowing personal vehicles to be used to transport smaller packages. And so there are insurance requirements, there are some driver requirements. They're much, much easier to fulfill, and the drivers can have less experience. And so that's something that can open up your recruiting pool. And it's also something that allows you to not necessarily have to add as many vehicles into your fleet for peak. There are also some cons that come along with it. There's a little bit more liability that you have. It does not indemnify you in the way that your bigger step vans are indemnified that are on your Schedule B. So there's pros and cons to the program, but in terms of hours tracking, yes, you still do have to track those hours. Most people pay those drivers an hourly rate. I've seen some contractors pay per stop. I've seen some pay daily. But since the vehicle is under 10,000 pounds and they are technically an employee and you do have to pay them W-2, FedEx will require that, then you are subject to overtime, and it's conducive to kind of an hourly model. Okay. Let's see. Let's go to Matthew O'Brien. This one's going to be good for you, Jesse. Matthew is asking, how many managers and BCs should be in place for 8 to 10 routes for a semi-absentee owner?
Yeah, great question. 8 to 10 is right on the bubble of when we would recommend bringing on additional management. So at that point, I would absolutely say you need to identify and promote a very solid right-hand person, what we would call a lead driver for that BC. I think 8 to 10 is still manageable if that's your only operation. There's potential economies of scale. If you have multiple CSAs, you can have some oversight. If you have one person who is basically doing the DRO for maybe 2 or 3 different CSAs, that takes a lot of operational pressure off of your manager on the ground there at each one. So different things you can do there to get creative. But if you're single CSA, 8 to 10 is when you need to start looking at getting other management in place. Yeah, I would definitely say.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And one thing that you can do to reduce how frequently you have to add management is utilizing lead drivers. That's something that we leaned on heavily in our operations. And I would honestly rather have more lead drivers and one BC rather than multiple BCs. There definitely is a size at which you've got to have multiple managers, and certainly for different CSAs, like even if they're in nearby terminals, you're going to want separate management for the separate CSAs. But within one CSA, one building, one team, it works really well to have a singular BC and then be working on training a lead driver so that as you grow, that lead can handle 1 to 2 days of dispatch for your manager. So your manager doesn't have to be 24/7 and you don't have to be the only relief for them if they want to be able to get a reset, take a break, because working 7 days a week, even in low volume environments like on Sundays and stuff, if your manager doesn't get a second to reset, then they're not going to be effective. So be building up a lead driver as well in conjunction with your BC. And your lead should be on a route every day that they're not managing.
Yep.
And it might not have to be a full-blown route. If you're a larger operation, it might be overflow. It might be some bulk stops, but that way you're still generating revenue with that management position, and it's something that can still support your BC 1 or 2 days a week.
Yep.
Let's see here. Okay. Oh, good question. So someone's asking, when you say 8 routes, are you speaking CSAs or 8 zip codes? So just to clarify that, 8 routes is not really, it's kind of neither. So let me clarify a little bit. 1 CSA is just your contracted service area. So that's the list of zip codes that you have an agreement with FedEx, that you have exclusive rights to deliver the packages that come into the network in those zip codes. So that's your CSA. It could have 1 zip code. It could have 100 zip codes. It just really depends on your area. And so when you're thinking about routes are not really within a certain number of zip codes either. It's really depending upon how many zip codes do you have, what's the geographic footprint of those, and what's the capacity of each route. So we have some routes in our operations that span many zip codes. We have some that only stay in 1 zip code. So as you're thinking about breakout of zip codes, I think that's one that you can kind of remove from your mind a little bit and just think about routes within a contracted service area. And the zip code piece is going to flux so much depending upon your territory.
And Grace, I was going to add, I think there's a little bit of confusion there because I've heard it different ways when people are talking about, brand new investors are like, okay, can I buy my own FedEx route? They're meaning the CSA. So I can see where that confusion would be. But when I'm talking about a route and like in DRO, it's an individual driver's daily work. So it's like a work area is what we call it. More lingo, but so you could have, you will generally have to have multiple routes in a single CSA. So.
Yes, exactly. All right. Another question for you, Jesse. This is a good one. What is the pay range for an experienced BC?
Yeah, good question. So I would say between 55 and 65,000 is a pretty standard range. Again, if you're getting into multiple CSAs, someone is kind of stepping up into a general manager, it's going to go up obviously, but yeah, single CSA right in that 60,000 range.
Mm-hmm. And I want to take a second to talk about bonus plans with that too, because I get a lot of questions around how do you bonus your managers and what should you bonus them on and what's the range? And so I like to give about 5 to 10% of their base salary as a bonus option for them. And the ways in which I bonus are going to be directly tied to initiatives that we need to take in our operation to improve whatever's struggling. So for you, that might be profitability. It might be your payroll's too high. It might be your repair maintenance is too high. It might be you have absentee issues in your operation, or you have an issue with turnover, or you have an issue with accidents. Like I could just keep going. There's so many things that you could hone in on and say the operation really needs to focus on X or even X and Y, and tie your manager's bonus to that so that your incentives are aligned and everything that they're motivated to do is also moving your operation in a direction that you want it to go. So I would encourage you to think about, if you're a current contractor, what are those things that I really wish I had a magic wand that I could just wave and say, if this could just get better, we'd be in a great spot. And I am telling you that money can be a magic wand. And if you wave it, your BC might just be motivated enough to make that go away and to fix it for you. So that's something that I would encourage you to do. Again, 5 to 10% of their annual income is the right amount for that. And I typically like to break it up into monthly or quarterly pieces, because if it's annually, then I think it can be really hard, especially in the BC role when you're just like in the grind every single day. Like it can be really hard to be motivated for something that seems so far away, versus if you have a monthly attainment. Some of mine are even weekly. For my managers, I have a weekly payroll budget attainment. And if they hit their goal of payroll, then they get a budget, or they get a bonus that week. And so, make it as small chunks as you feel comfortable with to give them that satisfaction and feeling like they are being rewarded in real time for what they're accomplishing.
Yep.
All right, we've got time for maybe one more question here. Okay, we'll end on kind of a general one because I think this is good. So someone's asking how they can get in contact with our team to learn more. And this is a great question. So these webinars are a great place to come and learn every week. And we hope that you guys come and learn a lot. But certainly our team will put contact info in the chat of a good general number or email to reach out to so that you can get engaged with our team and we can triage kind of what you're interested in and what you're looking for. And we can get you to the right person to talk to them about that. But thank you for that question, Kali, and we will be excited to hear from you. So, all right, I think this might be a good place to wrap up. And thank you guys for answering all of our questions and for sending in your questions. We are super, super happy to have you here and love getting to talk to you guys each week. So we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.